I am Arthur, and I am 32 years old. For exactly 10 years of my adult life, I acted as my family's personal, unregulated, and entirely unappreciated ATM before the entire toxic arrangement blew up in my face. While I was standing in my parents' perfectly manicured driveway, staring at a brand new, $130,000 Porsche that my part-time barista brother had just bought, my own mother looked me dead in the eye. She told me to pay his bills, to fund his delusional lifestyle, or consider myself completely cut off from the family forever. They humiliated me right there in the open air, making it perfectly clear that my only value as a son and a brother was the size of my wallet. But there was one massive thing they did not know. I had kept every single receipt, every bank statement, and my career was quietly reaching a level of success they could not even begin to comprehend. And now, they are the ones losing everything, begging on their knees, scrambling to pick up the broken pieces of their own terrible decisions. Before I tell you exactly how I tore down their delusions and took my life back, please hit that like button if you believe that family should never mean financial slavery. And don't forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Now, let's go back to that driveway where the nightmare finally reached its breaking point. It was a standard, deceptively quiet Sunday afternoon in late September. I pulled my 10-year-old, extremely reliable Honda Civic into my parents' driveway, fully expecting the usual dry pot roast, the forced and awkward conversation, and the inevitable passive-aggressive comments about why I wasn't married yet. Instead, my headlights washed over something that absolutely did not belong in that middle-class suburban neighborhood. It was a Porsche 911 Carrera. Bright, obnoxious, candy apple red. It looked like a billionaire's toy spaceship parked casually next to the modest minivans and sensible sedans lining the street. The neighborhood HOA meetings usually revolved around grass height and trash can placement, but this car was a screaming neon sign of misplaced priorities. Julian, my 28-year-old brother, was leaning against the hood. He had his arms crossed over his chest, wearing a smug, self-satisfied grin that you could probably see from 3 houses down. Julian worked maybe 20 hours a week pulling espresso shots at a local independent coffee shop. He still lived in a cramped, poorly insulated studio apartment that I knew for a definite fact he struggled to afford every single month. Yet, here he was wearing brand new designer sneakers, leaning against German engineering that cost more than a small house. I parked my Civic next to it. The contrast was almost comical, a perfect visual representation of our two very different lives. I stepped out of my car, and the smell of hot engine oil, expensive new leather, and fresh tire rubber hit me in the face. "Check it out," Julian called out loudly, not even bothering to say hello or ask how my week was. "I finally got something nice for myself. I deserve nice things, too, you know?" I stopped and stared at the vehicle, then slowly shifted my gaze to him. "It is a Porsche, Julian. This is 130 grand. Easy. Probably more with whatever custom packages you let them talk you into. How on earth did you do this?" He waved his hand dismissively in the air, acting as if dropping 6 figures on a sports car was a casual, everyday Tuesday afternoon decision for a guy who relied on a tip jar to buy groceries. I put a huge chunk down, financed the rest of it. "It is an investment in my image and my personal brand, Arthur. You wouldn't get it. You just save all your money and never live." I did not push the issue right then. I knew better than to start a war in the front yard. We went inside and had dinner. My mother, Eleanor, spent the entire agonizing meal fawning over Julian's supposed success. She paraded him around conversationally as if he had just won a Nobel Prize, rather than signing his life away to a predatory car loan. My father, Robert, just stared down at his plate, chewed his food meticulously, and watched the football game on the television, completely ignoring the massive financial elephant sitting right there in the dining room. After dessert was cleared, Julian grabbed my shoulder and pulled me out to the back patio. The smug, arrogant energy he had in the driveway was instantly gone. It was replaced by a nervous, calculating, almost twitchy energy that I recognized all too well. It was the exact same energy he had every time he was about to ask me to fix a disaster. He pulled out his expensive smartphone and started nervously scrolling through his emails. "So, the thing is," Julian started, not meeting my eyes, looking anywhere but at my face. "The insurance on the Porsche is kind of insane. They categorize it as a high-risk performance vehicle, especially for someone my age." "I am completely sure they do," I said, keeping my voice perfectly flat and devoid of any emotion. "It is about $800 a month," he muttered, kicking at a loose stone on the patio. "Plus the actual car payment, which is high. I am a little tight on cash right now. I was wondering, actually hoping, if you could just cover the insurance for a few months. Just until I get this big promotion at the coffee shop. They are talking about making me a regional shift lead." There was no promotion. There was never a promotion. He had been talking about becoming a manager for 3 years, and he was still cleaning the steam wands. I looked at my younger brother, fully expecting him to crack a smile, burst out laughing, and tell me it was a ridiculous practical joke. He was dead serious. He fully expected me to pay nearly $10,000 a year to insure a car I could not even comfortably afford myself. "Julian, I am absolutely not paying the insurance on your luxury sports car," I said quietly, firmly setting the boundary. His face hardened instantly. The victim complex that my mother had spent decades cultivating in him snapped right into place. His eyes narrowed. "Must be really nice having money, Arthur. Must be incredibly easy sitting in your paid-off house, judging me for wanting a piece of the good life. I am just asking my own brother for a little temporary help, and you act like I am robbing you at gunpoint. You are so utterly obsessed with being perfect and responsible." "I am not perfect," I replied, turning my back on him and reaching for the sliding glass door handle. "But I also did not buy a Porsche on a barista's salary. Handle your own choices." I did not stay for coffee. I grabbed my jacket from the hall closet, said a very tight, clipped goodbye to my parents, and walked out the front door. I could physically feel Julian glaring daggers at my back as I backed my old, reliable Civic out of their driveway. I was halfway home, driving through the darkened suburban streets, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned completely white, when my phone buzzed loudly in the cup holder. I ignored it until I pulled safely into my own garage and turned off the engine. I picked up the phone. It was a text message from my mother, Eleanor. It was not a question. It was not an attempt to mediate between two brothers. It was a cold, calculated, deeply manipulative command. "Julian told me what you said to him on the patio. You are his older brother. Family helps family, no matter what. Help him with the car insurance immediately, or do not bother coming home for the holidays this year. We do not need that kind of toxic selfishness in this family." I sat in the dark interior of my car, the engine ticking quietly as it cooled down in the garage. I read the message 3, maybe 4 times. Help him or do not come home. There was no inquiry about my own personal finances. There was absolutely no concern for my well-being, my stress levels, or my future. It was a pure, unadulterated ultimatum. Pay the monthly ransom for my brother's reckless, pathetic vanity, or be entirely excommunicated from the bloodline. I opened the family group chat on my phone. My father had seen the message. Read receipts were turned on. He had read it and said absolutely nothing. His silence was a booming, deafening endorsement of my mother's cruel terms. For an entire decade, I had been the sensible one. The rock, the safety net, the guy who quietly fixed the messes, paid the late fees, and kept the family reputation intact. And my grand reward for 10 years of unwavering financial loyalty was being threatened with total isolation simply because I refused to subsidize a luxury sports car. It was in that exact moment, sitting in the cold glow of my dashboard lights, that a heavy, rusted chain inside my chest finally and permanently snapped. I did not cry. I did not scream in frustration. I felt a strange, icy, profoundly peaceful calm wash over my entire body. I walked out of the garage, unlocked my front door, stepped inside, and sat down heavily on my living room couch. I did not bother turning on the lights. I just unlocked my phone screen. I went straight to my mother's contact file. I scrolled past years of her sending messages asking for favors, reminding me of Julian's endless struggles, demanding my presence at events I did not want to attend. I firmly pressed block caller. I went to Julian's contact file. Blocked. I went to my father's contact file. The man who had never stood up for me a single time in his entire life, the ultimate enabler by omission. Blocked. Finally, I opened the main family group chat. I did not type out a dramatic, emotional paragraph explaining my feelings. I did not beg them to understand my side. I just tapped, leave conversation, and then permanently deleted the thread from my device. Click, click, click. Just like that, the heaviest, most suffocating chains I had ever carried were entirely severed. I set my phone face down on the wooden coffee table. I sat there in the dark and waited for the crushing guilt to hit me. I waited for the conditioned panic of being a bad son, a terrible brother, to set in and choke me. But the only thing that filled my living room was silence. A beautiful, heavy, luxurious, golden silence. I stood up, took a long, hot shower, climbed into my bed, and for the absolutely first time in 10 long years, I slept completely through the night without grinding my teeth. The storm was undoubtedly coming. I knew that for a fact. But I also knew with total certainty that I was no longer standing helplessly in the valley, just waiting to be washed away. To truly understand the absolute, staggering audacity of Julian's request for insurance money, we have to rewind the clock back 2 years. We have to go back to a damp, freezing Tuesday morning in November, standing in a quiet cemetery on the edge of town. That was the day we buried my grandmother. She was a fiercely practical, fiercely independent, hard-working woman who survived hard times and believed in saving every single penny she ever earned. A few weeks after the funeral, when her estate was finally settled, she left Julian and me a specific inheritance. It was not a massive, endless fortune, but it was absolutely life-changing if you possessed even a shred of common sense and used it right. She left us exactly $85,000 each. We sat in a stuffy, wood-paneled office while the estate lawyer handed us the cashier's checks. The lawyer explicitly stated, reading from my grandmother's own written notes, that she wanted this money to be our solid foundation. She wanted it used for a college fund for future children, a down payment on real estate, or an emergency safety net. I took my $85,000 and immediately put it to work exactly as she intended. I used a large portion of it as a solid 20% down payment on a modest, 3-bedroom fixer-upper house in a decent up-and-coming neighborhood. The rest of the money went straight into a diverse portfolio of index funds and a high-yield savings account for emergencies. It was not flashy. It was not glamorous. But it was real estate. It was growing equity. It was a guaranteed, stable future. Julian, on the other hand, looked at that exact same cashier's check and saw a winning lottery ticket. He had a buddy named Marcus, a guy who peaked academically and socially in high school and routinely gave the most terrible, destructive life advice imaginable. Marcus convinced Julian that the only way to truly level up in modern life, to attract women and get respect, was to project an image of extreme wealth. So, Julian took his entire $85,000 inheritance, the culmination of our grandmother's lifelong frugality, and marched directly into a high-end luxury car dealership downtown. I only found out the horrifying details later from a mutual acquaintance who worked in auto sales. Julian had walked in and immediately been targeted by a notoriously shady finance guy named David, who saw a naive, cash-rich kid coming from a mile away. Julian dropped almost his entire inheritance, over $80,000 in cash, as a massive down payment just to get approved for that Porsche. Because his verifiable barista salary was an absolute joke on paper, David the finance guy still locked him into a predatory, high-interest loan for the remaining $50,000 of the car's grossly inflated price tag. Julian burned through $85,000 of our grandmother's blood, sweat, and tears in one single afternoon. He traded a secure financial future, the ability to buy a home, the ability to breathe easy, for a shiny red hood ornament and a crushing, unmanageable monthly payment. And now, exactly 2 years later, with the remainder of his cash entirely gone and reality setting in, He was looking directly at me to keep the pathetic illusion alive. As I sat in my quiet house the morning after executing the mass family block, the reality of my historical role hit me. I walked into my home office, opened my laptop, and pulled up my main banking spreadsheets. I am a senior project manager by trade. My entire career is built on tracking details, budgets, and timelines. I created a brand new, blank tab in the software and titled it simply, Julian. I started going back through the years, pulling up archived bank statements, credit card logs, and old digital receipts. The memories attached to each of these transactions made my stomach physically turn with nausea. There was the $2,500 wire transfer I sent him 4 years ago when he was facing a legitimate legal eviction. He had taken his monthly rent money and spent it all on VIP backstage passes to a 3-day music festival in another state. My mother had called me at work, sobbing hysterically on the phone, screaming that Julian would be sleeping on the streets and that it would be a stain on the family name. She refused to let him move home to teach him a lesson. She demanded I pay it. I paid it. There was the $4,000 payment to completely clear a high-interest credit card debt he had racked up exclusively buying designer clothes and expensive shoes. When I confronted my mother about why she was asking me to pay for his luxury wardrobe, her twisted logic was astounding. He needs to look presentable and successful to land a good salary, Arthur. Do not be so incredibly stingy with your tech money. You make plenty. Then came the endless stream of smaller, but equally infuriating emergency bailouts. The $2,000 in medical bills from a reckless luxury skiing trip he went on without any health insurance. The repeated short-term loans for basic groceries that somehow mysteriously turned into photos of him eating at expensive downtown steakhouses on Instagram the very next day. The $1,500 for severe car repairs on his previous vehicle because he simply refused to spend $40 to ever change the engine oil, running the motor completely dry until it seized. I highlighted the entire column of numbers and hit the AutoSum button. The number that flashed back at me on the bright screen was not just a few bucks between brothers. It was not just pitching in for pizza. Over the course of 10 grueling years, I had quietly, consistently funneled exactly $48,750 into keeping Julian afloat. Almost $50,000. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring slightly. That was a whole year's salary for a lot of hardworking people. That was a fully funded college fund for a child. That was a massive, compounding chunk of a retirement portfolio that I had effectively set on fire. I had willingly sacrificed my own financial growth, delayed my own goals, to be the ultimate shock absorber for a grown man who flatly refused to grow up. And Eleanor and Robert had facilitated, encouraged, and demanded every single transaction. They had successfully turned my basic decency and responsibility into a mandatory, non-negotiable obligation. I was not an older brother to Julian. I was a private, uncompensated insurance firm exclusively underwriting Julian's catastrophic life choices. The deep, burning resentment did not just come from the staggering amount of stolen money. It came from the profound, daily lack of basic respect. My mind drifted back to our family Thanksgiving dinner just the previous year. We were all seated around my parents' formal dining table, the good china brought out for the occasion. I had just paid off another $1,500 of Julian's severely overdue utility bills the week prior, just to keep his heat and lights from being shut off in the middle of winter. During dinner, my uncle leaned over and asked how my job in tech project management was going, asking if I was in line for a promotion. Before I could even open my mouth to answer, Julian violently snorted into his wine glass. "Arthur is just a corporate drone," Julian declared loudly to the entire table, stabbing his portion of turkey aggressively with his fork. Sitting in a gray cubicle all day, staring blindly at spreadsheets, taking orders from management. I could never, ever do that. I need true freedom. I need a creative outlet for my energy. There is no real money or fulfillment in being a middle manager anyway. It's a dead-end life. He said this incredibly insulting thing while literally digesting the food I had indirectly paid for, sitting in a house where he regularly came to do his free laundry, while relying on my bank account to keep his own apartment's electricity turned on. My mother laughed. She actually threw her head back and laughed affectionately at his rebellious, artistic spirit. My father cleared his throat, looked at his plate, and asked someone to please pass the gravy boat. Not a single person defended me. After dinner concluded, I retreated to the kitchen to get a glass of ice water, trying to physically distance myself from the room. My Aunt Clara, my mother's older sister, quietly followed me in. Aunt Clara was widely considered the black sheep of the older generation simply because she actually possessed common sense, lived independently, and did not care whose fragile feelings she hurt by stating the obvious truth. She leaned back against the granite counter, crossed her arms tightly, and looked at me with an expression of deep, painful pity. "You know he is absolutely draining you, right?" Clara said quietly, her eyes locked on mine. "I am just helping out where I can. It's family?" I deflected defensively, staring intensely at the ice cubes swirling in my glass. Clara sighed, a heavy, deeply tired sound that seemed to carry years of observing this dysfunction. "Arthur, you need to hear this and you need to believe it. Your mother knows exactly what Julian is doing. She knows he is using you. She actively allows it and encourages it because as long as you are the one footing the bill and handling the stress, she does not have to do the hard, uncomfortable work of actually parenting him and telling him no. You need to close the bank, kid. You need to shut the vault door before they bleed you down to the absolute bone." I had not listened to her then. The ingrained guilt, the lifelong programming to be the good son, was far too strong. But now, sitting in my office a year later, as I finally closed the spreadsheet on my laptop and looked at the number 48,750, I realized Aunt Clara was the only person in that entire bloodline who actually saw me as a human being. The rest of them just saw a walking, breathing checkbook. The past was a long, dark tunnel of exploitation, and the realization was the inciting incident that meant I could never, ever go back. Monday morning officially arrived. I woke up, went through my normal routine, brewed a strong pot of black coffee, sat at my kitchen island, and opened my work laptop to start my day. I felt incredibly rested. However, out of morbid, psychological curiosity, I pulled my silenced, heavily blocked-up personal phone out of the desk drawer. Even though I had blocked their numbers directly from ringing through the carrier, Apple's operating system still shuttles blocked calls into a hidden, separate voicemail folder. Furthermore, iMessages sent from obscure email addresses can sometimes slip through the cracks if the Apple ID itself isn't fully, universally locked down across all devices. I checked the recent call logs first. It was a digital bloodbath. 52 missed calls. It looked as though an entire telemarketing call center had been desperately trying to reach me to warn me about an impending apocalypse. I tapped over to the hidden voicemail tab. There were exactly 27 voicemails. I took a deep breath, braced myself, and hit play on the very first one. It was my mother. Her voice was not sad. She was not crying. Her tone was vibrating with pure, unadulterated indignation and fury. "Arthur, what in God's name is going on with your phone? I have called you 6 times. Call me back right this instant. This childish tantrum of yours is utterly ridiculous and I will not tolerate it." I skipped to the 4th voicemail. It was Julian. "Bro, seriously? Are you actually ignoring me? Over a couple $100 for insurance? You are a petty, pathetic joke of a man. Call Mom. She's losing her mind over your stupidity." By the time I reached the 12th voicemail, Eleanor's tone had dramatically shifted tactics. She had moved from outright anger to a performance of theatrical, hysterical panic. Arthur, please pick up. Julian is having a severe panic attack in his bedroom. He cannot breathe. He thinks he might lose his car and his entire life is falling apart. How can you be so incredibly cruel to your own flesh and blood? Call me immediately. We need your credit card number for the insurance portal. I deleted all 27 voicemails without listening to the rest. Then, I opened my personal email application. There was a new message sitting at the top of my inbox from Julian. There was no subject line. There was no text in the body of the email explaining himself. It was simply a high-resolution screenshot of his Geico auto insurance bill. The bold red text at the top read, $840 due in 3 days. Below the attached picture, he had typed one single, accusatory sentence. "You seriously going to let me lose my car?" Not, "I made a terrible mistake signing that loan." Not, "I am going to get a second job to figure this out." Just pure, unadulterated, weaponized blame. In his twisted, heavily enabled mind, if the precious Porsche was repossessed by the bank, it would not be because a part-time barista bought a six-figure luxury vehicle he couldn't afford. It would be entirely because Arthur, the evil, wealthy, selfish older brother, maliciously refused to pay the required ransom to save him. I calmly dragged the email to the trash folder, and then permanently emptied the trash. By Wednesday afternoon, my mother finally realized that I was absolutely not bluffing. The direct approach had failed, so she opened the familial playbook and deployed the flying monkeys. My phone buzzed with an incoming text message from my cousin Henry. Henry was a guy who owed me a massive, life-altering favor. 3 years ago, Henry went through a horrific, incredibly nasty divorce and custody battle. He was dead broke, facing losing access to his kids. I had quietly written a check for $8,000 to retain a ruthless custody lawyer for him, a debt he had casually forgotten to ever pay back. "Hey man," Henry's text read, "your mom just called me sobbing. She is a total wreck. Look, Arthur, I know Julian is a piece of work and he messes up, but freezing out your own mother? That is incredibly cold, man. Family is family. Blood is thicker than water. You are the successful one. You need to be the bigger man. Step up and just fix this situation so everyone can have peace." I stared at the message, the absolute hypocrisy burning my eyes. I did not reply. Henry did not actually care about the sanctity of family. Henry cared deeply about keeping Aunt Eleanor happy, so she wouldn't cut off his free access to the family's inherited lake house during the summer holidays. He was willing to throw me right under the bus to protect his own vacation plans. An hour after Henry's text, a direct message popped up on my Facebook account from my cousin Beatrice. Beatrice was the undisputed family gossip, a woman who thrived on manufacturing drama and spreading misery like it was oxygen. "Arthur, OMG, sweetheart, I heard from Aunt Eleanor that you guys had a huge, terrible fight. Are you okay? Where are you currently staying? Are you at home? Let's grab lunch this week, just you and me to talk. I totally support you and want to hear your side." It was a blatant, transparent trap. Eleanor had explicitly sent Beatrice to act as a double agent, trying to find out if I was barricaded inside my house or if I had fled out of town, desperately trying to physically track my movements so she could ambush me in person. I did not type a single word. I took a quick screenshot of Beatrice's deceitful message for my own records, permanently blocked her profile on Facebook and Instagram, and went back to my spreadsheets. They were furiously circling the wagons. In their collective minds, I had committed the ultimate, unforgivable sin. I had violently stopped playing my assigned, subservient role. I wasn't just refusing to pay a bill. I was holding up a giant, terrifying mirror to the family dynamics. I was forcing them to face the horrific reality of Julian's utter failure and Eleanor's destructive enabling, and they absolutely hated me for it. They wanted to beat me back into submission. They wanted me back in my designated box, quiet, compliant, apologetic, and writing large checks. But the box was already burned to ashes, and I was holding the match. The tense, heavy silence lasted for about a week. I went to the office, hit the gym harder than usual, cooked decent, healthy meals. With every passing day of no contact, my chest felt physically lighter. Then came late Friday night. It was nearing midnight, and I was reading a book in bed when a new email notification aggressively popped up on my phone screen. It was from a newly created, generic Gmail address, something like julian.temp2024@gmail.com, clearly manufactured just 5 minutes ago solely to bypass my strict communication blocks. I opened the email. There were no words in the body. It was just a single, slightly blurry, hastily taken photograph taken in the dead of night. It showed the cracked asphalt driveway of Julian's cheap apartment complex. In the exact center of the frame, bathed in the harsh, unflattering orange glow of a sodium street lamp, was Julian's shiny red Porsche 911 Carrera. Its front wheels were jacked high up in the air, securely strapped down with heavy yellow chains to the back of a massive, heavy-duty commercial tow truck. The repo man had finally cometh. Julian had obviously missed his actual, massive car payment on top of defaulting on the mandated insurance policy. The bank's grace period had expired. Once he realized my wallet was permanently, undeniably closed for business, his entire financial house of cards had collapsed with breathtaking, spectacular speed. Underneath the attached photo, there was a brief message typed entirely in angry, unhinged capital letters. "This is 100% your fault. You ruined my life. You sabotaged my future. I hope you are happy knowing you destroyed your own brother for no reason." I held the phone up in the dark and stared intently at the picture. I zoomed in on the burly tow truck driver in the background, securing the final straps around the expensive tires. I waited for the heavy pang of older brother guilt to strike me in the gut. I waited for the conditioned voice in the back of my head to whisper, "You could have prevented this humiliation. You had the money in your checking account." But I felt absolutely nothing. No guilt, no remorse, no sadness. Just a cold, clinical, almost scientific observation of cause and effect. Julian had willingly touched a glowing hot stove despite 100 warnings, and for the absolute first time in his 28 years on this earth, I had not thrown my own hand into the roaring fire to save his skin from burning. I did not type a reply. I did not save the picture to my camera roll. I calmly closed the email application, reached over to turn off my bedside reading lamp, and went to sleep. The Porsche was officially gone, hauled away into the night, and with it went the absolute last frayed string tying me to Julian's pathetic delusions of grandeur. Without the shiny red Porsche acting as a shield for his fragile, inflated ego, Julian's entire persona completely shattered within days. He could no longer face his friends, who he had relentlessly bragged to. He couldn't face his co-workers at the coffee shop because he had spent 2 solid years loudly proclaiming his impending wealth and superiority. He was too embarrassed to take the public bus to work. So, predictably and pathetically, he simply stopped showing up. He quit his barista job without giving notice. Unable to pay his monthly rent without even a part-time income, he immediately broke his apartment lease, abandoned half his cheap furniture, and moved directly back into my parents' house. He retreated into his old childhood bedroom, pulled the blackout blinds tightly shut, and dedicated his entire existence to playing online video games in the dark and wallowing in his status as the ultimate victim of my cruelty. I only knew the granular details of this pathetic collapse because Aunt Clara called me a few weeks later. I had deliberately not blocked her number, knowing I needed at least one honest scout on the inside. "Arthur, you really need to know what is happening over here," Clara said, her voice tight, hushed, and vibrating with deep anxiety. She sounded like she was hiding in a closet. "I told you last time, Clara. I am entirely out. His embarrassing living situation is simply not my problem to solve anymore." "It is not just him, Arthur," she pressed urgently, ignoring my boundary. "Eleanor is completely losing her mind. She is so desperate to make Julian feel better about the repo man taking the car that she is aggressively subsidizing his entire life to compensate for his trauma. Dad makes okay money, but not enough to financially support a grown man's luxury lifestyle and depression meals," I said, leaning against my kitchen counter. "That is exactly the point," Clara whispered frantically. "Your mother is quietly, methodically draining their 401k retirement accounts. She is pulling heavy penalties from their retirement funds just to keep Julian comfortable. She's buying him expensive imported groceries, paying his premium cell phone bill, ordering high-end takeout every single night so he doesn't have to suffer the indignity of cooking. And the absolute worst part? She is telling every single person in the extended family, her church group, her book club, that you are the sole reason they are facing total financial ruin. She is framing you as the wealthy, greedy villain who cruelly abandoned the family in their darkest hour of need." I gripped the edge of the granite counter so hard my fingers ached. "Wait, you are telling me she is literally stealing from her own future, risking eating cat food in her 70s, just to buy him video games and sushi right now?" Yes, yes, she is. And Arthur, she is planning something big. She is talking nonstop about how Thanksgiving is coming up in 2 weeks. She thinks she can use the sacred holiday tradition to ambush you in person. She thinks if she gets you in the room with the whole family staring at you, you will cave and open your checkbook. Keep your guard up, kid. Lock your doors. I thanked Clara sincerely for the warning and hung up the phone. The sickness in that suburban house was not just toxic. It was financially terminal. My own mother would rather face absolute poverty and bankruptcy in her old age than look in the mirror and admit her golden child was a spectacular, lazy failure. 2 weeks before the Thanksgiving holiday, the inevitable, desperate email arrived. My mother had circumvented my strict communication blocks yet again, this time sending a heavily worded message directly to my professional corporate work email address. It was a severe, highly inappropriate boundary violation that could have caused issues with my IT department, but Eleanor did not care about professional boundaries when she was on a crusade. The subject line of the email was simply, "Thanksgiving. Please read." I opened it while sitting at my desk at the tech firm. It was an absolute masterpiece of textbook emotional blackmail. "Arthur, my son, I know you are incredibly angry. I know you feel entirely justified in your little rebellion against us. But family is ultimately about forgiveness and grace. Your younger brother is in a very, very dark place right now. He is severely depressed. He cries every day, and he desperately needs the guidance of his older brother. Your father and I are struggling immensely to keep things together financially because of this crisis. It is Thanksgiving next week. We are hosting the traditional family dinner at 3 p.m. sharp, exactly as we always do. We fully expect you to be there sitting at your chair. Put aside your stubborn pride. Bring your checkbook to help us resolve this temporary setback and help us fix this broken family. If you do not show up, if you leave an empty chair at that table, you are officially, permanently turning your back on your own blood. The choice is yours. She did not ask how I was doing. She did not ask about my career or my health. She did not offer a single syllable of apology for the vicious ultimatum she threw at me in the driveway months ago. She simply demanded my physical presence and explicitly, brazenly demanded my money to fix the mess she created. I did not reply to the email. I did not type out a refusal. Instead, I stood up from my corporate desk, drove home early, and walked straight into my home office. I unlocked my heavy metal filing cabinet. I pulled out my thick physical banking files. I logged into my online banking portals and began hitting the print button over and over again. I printed the physical receipt for the $2,500 emergency wire transfer for Julian's apartment eviction. I printed the confirmation page for the $4,000 credit card payoff. I printed every single overdue utility bill I had covered, every emergency Cash App transfer log, every unpaid medical bill statement. I took the entire stack of printed, undeniable, legally binding financial papers, a stack nearly an inch thick, and marched over to my dining room table. I used a thick, bold red Sharpie marker and wrote the grand total calculation on the very top page in massive numbers, $48,750. I carefully, methodically placed the entire stack of evidence inside a heavy manila envelope and sealed it with a metal clasp. I did not know exactly what chaotic, manipulative ambush Eleanor was planning for Thanksgiving Day, but I knew with absolute certainty that I would not be playing a passive, defensive game anymore. If she wanted to use a family holiday tradition as a blunt weapon against me, I was going to bring a meticulously documented nuclear bomb to dinner. The quiet, peaceful calm before the storm was officially over. It was time for war. Thanksgiving Day arrived with a bitter, biting cold that perfectly matched my mood. I had absolutely no intention of going to my parents' house. I had spent the morning working out in my garage gym, enjoying the profound peace of a holiday without the crushing weight of familial expectations. Around 2 in the afternoon, I started cooking my own meal. I was not roasting a massive turkey for one person. I had gone to a high-end local butcher and bought a prime, dry-aged ribeye steak. I poured myself a glass of incredibly expensive, small-batch bourbon, turned on some jazz music, and started prepping my cast-iron skillet. The house smelled of rosemary, garlic, and freedom. At exactly 3:15, the heavy, aggressive pounding on my front door started. It was not a polite, neighborly knock. It was the frantic, demanding pounding of people who believed they owned the property and the person inside it. I set my glass down on the kitchen island. I walked down the short hallway and looked through the peephole. My stomach muscles tightened, but my heart rate stayed perfectly steady. Standing on my front porch, bundled in winter coats, was a complete ambush party. My mother Eleanor was standing front and center, holding a cheap, store-bought pumpkin pie in a plastic container like it was some sort of peace offering. Behind her stood my father Robert, staring down at his expensive leather shoes, actively avoiding eye contact with the door. To their right was Julian, looking incredibly sullen and inconvenienced, shivering in a thin designer jacket he had probably bought with my money 3 years ago. And flanking them, providing the necessary audience and muscle for Eleanor's grand performance, were Cousin Henry and Cousin Beatrice. They had actually tracked me down. They had organized a mob, driven across town, and decided to invade my sanctuary on a national holiday. I unlocked the deadbolt, turned the handle, and pulled the door open. I did not step aside. I stood squarely in the frame, blocking the entrance. "Arthur, sweetheart," Eleanor gushed, her voice dripping with a fake, saccharine sweetness that made my skin crawl. She practically shoved the plastic pie container toward my chest. "Since you were being so stubborn and refused to come to the family dinner, we decided we simply had to bring Thanksgiving directly to you. Family belongs together today. I did not invite any of you to my home," I said, my voice completely devoid of any warmth. "You need to leave." "Oh, stop being so dramatic, Arthur," Cousin Beatrice chimed in, trying to peer over my shoulder to snoop at the interior of my house. "Aunt Eleanor has been crying all week. Just let us in so we can sit down like civilized adults and hash this silly disagreement out." "Yeah, man," Cousin Henry added, puffing out his chest slightly to look intimidating. "You are acting like a petulant child. Your brother is hurting. Have a heart and let us inside." I looked at Henry, the man whose custody lawyer I had paid for, and felt a wave of absolute disgust. I realized in that moment that keeping them on the porch would only result in a shouting match that my neighbors would hear. If Eleanor wanted a stage for her grand theatrical production, I was going to give her one, and then I was going to burn the theater to the ground. I silently stepped back and swung the door open. They filed into my living room like a conquering army. Eleanor immediately started assessing the cleanliness of my baseboards. Julian threw himself onto my expensive leather sofa, pulling his phone out instantly as if he was entirely bored by the whole ordeal. Robert hovered near the entryway, looking like a man walking to his own execution. "Wow, it smells amazing in here," Beatrice said, her eyes darting around my living room, calculating the cost of my furniture. "Are you cooking a steak? For Thanksgiving? That is so depressing and isolating, Arthur." "I was having a very peaceful afternoon," I said, leaning against the archway that separated the living room from the dining room. "So, let us skip the fake pleasantries, Eleanor. You did not pack 5 people into an SUV to bring me a $5 grocery store pie. Why are you inside my house?" Eleanor dropped the act instantly. Her face hardened, the sweet motherly facade melting away to reveal the demanding, entitled enabler underneath. She placed her hands on her hips. "We are here to resolve this ridiculous financial strike of yours," Eleanor stated firmly, speaking to me as if I were a misbehaving teenager. "Julian is suffering. His credit is being severely damaged because that awful bank took his car. He cannot get to job interviews. You have made your little point, Arthur. We see that you are angry, but enough is enough. We calculated the fees to get his vehicle out of the impound lot, plus the back-owed insurance, and the current month's payment. We need a check for $5,200 today. Your father and I will cover the holiday dinner costs, but you are handling this." I stared at her. She wasn't asking. She was billing me. "And what exactly makes you think I am going to write that check?" I asked softly. Julian scoffed loudly from the couch, not even looking up from his phone screen. Because you are sitting on a pile of cash and you owe the family, bro. You are hoarding wealth while I am literally stranded at mom and dad's house. Stop being a sociopath. Henry nodded in agreement. He has a point, Arthur. You have a great tech salary. Taking care of your younger brother is just the right thing to do. If you don't write the check, you are just being vindictive. I looked around the room. I looked at the 5 people who felt entirely entitled to the money I earned through 60-hour work weeks, high-stress project deadlines, and years of disciplined saving. They viewed me purely as a utility. Stay right there, I said. I walked over to the dining room table where the heavy manila envelope was sitting precisely where I had left it. I picked it up. It felt heavy in my hands, a physical manifestation of a decade of exploitation. I walked back into the living room and stood directly in front of the coffee table. Every eye in the room tracked my movement. You want to talk about what I owe this family? I said, my voice rising just enough to command the entire space. You want to talk about hoarding wealth and doing the right thing. Let us have a completely honest conversation about the finances of this family. I unclasped the metal top of the envelope and pulled out the thick stack of printed banking documents. I slammed the entire stack down onto the glass coffee table with a loud, resounding crack that made Robert physically jump. The top page stared up at them, the bold red marker displaying the number, $48,750. What is this? Eleanor demanded, taking a cautious step forward, her eyes narrowing at the massive number written in red. That, I said, pointing directly at the stack, is the ledger. That is the exact, meticulously documented total of every single dollar I have funneled directly into Julian's bank account, his creditors, his landlords, and his utility companies over the last 10 years. Almost $50,000. That is money that was stolen directly from my future to subsidize his catastrophic present. Julian finally put his phone down, sitting up slightly, his face flushing a deep, guilty red. That is a complete lie. You never gave me that much. Page 3 is the $2,500 wire transfer that stopped your eviction when you went to a music festival instead of paying rent. I fired back, not breaking eye contact with him. Page 8 is the $4,000 credit card payoff for your designer clothes. Page 12 is the medical bill from your luxury ski trip. It is all there, Julian. Every single agonizing dime. I kept the receipts. Eleanor's face went pale, but she quickly rallied, slipping right back into her defensive manipulation. Arthur, that was family help. You cannot hold past generosity over your brother's head like a weapon. We do not keep score in this house. You don't keep score because you are never the ones paying the bill. I shot back, my voice echoing off the walls. I sacrificed my own investments. I delayed my own life goals. You used me as a human shield to protect your golden child from the consequences of his own profound laziness and stupidity. And your reward to me was threatening to banish me from the family because I finally said the word no. The room fell into a stunned, incredibly tense silence. Henry and Beatrice exchanged a very uncomfortable look. They had been told I was throwing a tantrum over a small insurance bill. Staring at a verified stack of documents proving a $50,000 bailout completely shattered the narrative Eleanor had fed them. You are being incredibly disrespectful to your mother, Robert finally mumbled weakly from the corner, attempting to salvage some scrap of patriarchal authority. Do not speak to me about respect, Dad. I snapped, rounding on him. You sat there for 10 years and watched your wife use me as an ATM. You are a coward. You chose a quiet house over protecting your oldest son from financial abuse. Robert recoiled as if I had physically struck him. Eleanor opened her mouth to start screaming, her face contorting with absolute, unfiltered rage. But before she could utter a single syllable, the sharp, melodic ringing of my phone cut through the heavy air of the living room. My phone was sitting on the kitchen counter, but it was actively connected to the high-end Bluetooth sound system installed in the ceiling of my living room and kitchen. The caller ID flashed brightly on the digital display of the oven clock. It was Mr. Sterling, the CEO of the massive technology firm where I worked. I held up one finger, demanding total silence from the mob standing in my living room. I walked over to the kitchen island and tapped the accept button, routing the call through the overhead speakers. The audio was crystal clear, filling the entire house. "Arthur, happy Thanksgiving, my boy." Mr. Sterling's booming, incredibly cheerful voice echoed down from the ceiling. "Happy Thanksgiving, Mr. Sterling. To what do I owe the pleasure on a holiday?" I asked, leaning casually against the counter, watching the confused faces of my family. "I know I shouldn't be calling you on a holiday, but the executive board just finalized the paperwork an hour ago, and I simply could not wait until Monday to give you the official news." Sterling boomed enthusiastically. "I wanted to personally congratulate you. As of the 1st of the month, you are officially the new Vice President of Global Operations." Julian's jaw literally dropped open. The smugness vanished completely, replaced by a look of profound, uncomprehending shock. Eleanor froze mid-breath. "Thank you, sir. I deeply appreciate the board's confidence in me," I said smoothly. "Confidence? Arthur, you single-handedly saved this firm from absolute disaster with that real estate acquisition project last quarter. You are brilliant. Now, Human Resources will send over the formal contract on Monday, but the board unanimously approved your new base salary at $250,000, plus the annual performance bonuses." Mr. Sterling paused, chuckling warmly. "And speaking of bonuses, check your bank account on Tuesday. The board authorized a direct, one-time six-figure bonus to hit your account as a thank you for the acquisition. You earned every single penny of it, Arthur. Go buy yourself a boat or something." The silence in my living room was absolute. It was a suffocating, heavy vacuum. You could have heard a pin drop on the hardwood floor. "I will definitely put it to good use, Mr. Sterling. Enjoy your turkey with your family. I will see you in the executive suite on Monday," I said. "Enjoy your day, VP," Sterling replied, and the line clicked dead. I slowly walked back into the living room. The dynamic of the entire space had fundamentally, permanently shifted. The ground beneath their feet had completely vanished. For years, Julian had mocked me as a corporate drone. Eleanor had treated my career as nothing more than a convenient, minor slush fund to tap into. They had genuinely believed that Julian, with his barista apron and his financed Porsche, was the special one destined for greatness, while I was just the boring, dependable workhorse. In the span of 2 minutes, the booming voice of a CEO had completely obliterated their entire worldview. They had just found out that the son they treated like absolute garbage, the son they threatened to disown, was not just successful. He was independently wealthy, highly respected, and operating on a level of power and influence they could not even begin to fathom. Beatrice looked at me with wide, completely terrified eyes, suddenly realizing she had chosen the wrong side to spy for. Henry looked physically sick to his stomach, probably calculating that he was never, ever getting another legal bill paid for him. Julian stared at me, his eyes darting frantically. "A six-figure bonus? A $250,000 salary? Bro, Arthur, you have that kind of money coming in, and you are seriously going to let me lose my car over $5,000? You could write that check right now and not even feel it. You are literally a millionaire." The sheer, staggering audacity of his statement was almost impressive. Even after seeing the $50,000 ledger, even after hearing my promotion, his brain was still fundamentally hardwired to figure out how my success could directly benefit him. I walked right up to Julian. I looked down at him sitting on my couch. "You are absolutely right, Julian," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "I could write that check right now. I could write a check and buy you 10 Porsches in cash. I have the money, but the bank of Arthur is permanently, irrevocably closed. I am not letting you lose your car. I am simply refusing to save it. There is a massive difference." I turned to my mother. Eleanor looked like she was hyperventilating. Her eyes were darting from the stack of papers on the table to the ceiling speakers, desperately trying to calculate how to manipulate this new, terrifying reality. "Arthur, honey?" Eleanor started, her voice trembling, attempting to resurrect the sweet, maternal tone. "We had no idea you were doing so incredibly well at the company. We are so very proud of you. Since you have this new blessing, Surely we can sit down and discuss how to help your brother get back on his feet. A rising tide lifts all boats in a family. Stop, I commanded, raising my hand. Do not dare pretend you are proud of me now just because you smelled blood in the water. You came into my home to bully me. You brought an audience to shame me. You threatened to cut me out of this family over a car insurance bill. I accept your terms, Eleanor. I accept the excommunication. I walked over to the front door and pulled it wide open, letting the freezing November air rush into the warm house. Get out of my house, I said, pointing out to the driveway. Every single one of you, get out, get in your cars, and never, ever show up on my property uninvited again. If you do, I will call the police and have you formally trespassed. We are done. Nobody argued. The display of absolute authority, backed by the undeniable proof of my financial and professional power, had completely broken their resolve. Henry and Beatrice scurried out the door first, keeping their heads down, desperate to escape the blast zone. Robert shuffled out next, looking like a broken, defeated old man. Julian walked out slowly, glaring at me with a toxic mixture of pure hatred and intense, burning jealousy. Eleanor was the last to leave. She paused on the threshold, looking back at me. She opened her mouth, trying to find one last hook, one last guilt trip to throw at me. But she looked into my eyes and saw absolutely nothing but cold, impenetrable steel. She swallowed hard, clutched her cheap plastic pie container to her chest, and walked out into the cold. I slammed the heavy door shut. I threw the deadbolt. I walked back to the kitchen, picked up my glass of expensive bourbon, and took a long, incredibly satisfying sip. The war was over. I had won. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far. You're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. The immediate aftermath of Thanksgiving was a profound, beautiful silence. But the shock waves of that afternoon continued to tear through the toxic foundation of my family. A few weeks later, in mid-December, my phone rang. It was Chloe, Julian's girlfriend of 2 years. She was a decent girl, hardworking, but entirely blinded by Julian's fake charm. I answered cautiously. Arthur, hi. It is Chloe. I am so sorry to bother you, she said, her voice shaky and thick with tears. It's okay, Chloe. What is going on? I needed to apologize to you, she sobbed quietly. Julian came home from your house on Thanksgiving and told me this horrific story about how you screamed at his mother and violently threw them out. He said you got a massive promotion and were hoarding all the wealth while he suffered. He made you sound like a monster. I am used to his narrative, Chloe. But then I saw the papers, she continued. Julian left his backpack open in the bedroom. He had stolen the envelope from your coffee table when you were at the door. I looked inside. Arthur, I saw the spreadsheet. I saw the $50,000. I saw the rent payments for the festival incident. I had absolutely no idea. He told me he was self-made. He told me his coffee shop job was just research for a business he was starting. Julian is a pathological liar when it comes to his image, I said gently. I packed my bags yesterday, Chloe said, exhaling a long, shuddering breath. I moved out. Without the Porsche, without your money funding our dates. I finally saw him for what he really is. He sits in his dark room all day, screaming at video games, expecting his mother to bring him sandwiches. I cannot build a life with a parasite. I just wanted to tell you that you were right. You were right to cut him off. And I am so sorry I ever judged you. I thanked Chloe for her honesty and wished her the best. Her departure was the final, devastating nail in the coffin of Julian's ego. The twist wasn't just that I had money. The twist was that without my money, Julian was completely unlovable, even to the woman sharing his bed. 2 nights later, I received another call from an unknown number. I answered it. Arthur, it is Dad. Robert's voice sounded incredibly frail, accompanied by the distinct hum of highway traffic in the background. He was calling me from a payphone or a burner phone at a gas station, terrified that Eleanor would catch him. "What do you want, Dad?" "I am calling to apologize," Robert choked out, his voice cracking with genuine emotion. "I am so deeply, profoundly sorry, my son. For 10 years, I sat in my armchair and watched your mother drain you. I watched her manipulate your kindness to cover up her own failures as a parent to Julian. I knew it was wrong. God help me, I knew it was evil. But I was so tired of fighting with her. I chose my own quiet evening over your financial safety. I am a coward. I stood by my living room window, looking out at the snow falling. You are right, Dad. You are a coward. Your silence did just as much damage as her screaming." "I know," he wept quietly. "The house is a nightmare now. Chloe left him. Julian is spiraling. Eleanor is emptying our savings to try and buy his happiness, and we are going to be broke in 2 years. You did the right thing, Arthur. You saved yourself. Do not ever look back. I just needed you to know that your old man knows you are a good man." He hung up before I could reply. It was the most honest, painful truth he had ever spoken. The empire of manipulation was crumbling, and the villains were finally trapped in the burning castle they had built. Time is the ultimate revealer of truth. I allowed a full year to pass. A massive, transformative jump in time where I focused entirely on my own life, my own career, and my own profound healing. With my new vice president's salary and the massive 6-figure acquisition bonus safely deposited, I aggressively expanded my real estate portfolio. I purchased a beautiful, multi-unit rental property on the affluent north side of the city. I traveled to Europe for 3 weeks, completely unplugged from the grid. I started dating a wonderful, fiercely independent woman who respected my boundaries. My life was a testament to the absolute power of cutting off dead weight. I woke up every single morning feeling a profound, deep-seated peace that I had never experienced in my entire adult life. I maintained contact with exactly one person from my extended family, Aunt Clara. We met for Earl Grey tea at a quiet little cafe downtown once every few months. Clara was my trusted informant, delivering the spectacular reality checks of my family's downfall with the clinical precision of a news anchor. We sat by a large bay window, watching the autumn leaves blow across the sidewalk. Clara took a delicate sip of her tea and leaned in, a grim but satisfied look on her face. "The chickens have officially come home to roost, Arthur," Clara said, setting her teacup down carefully. "It is a complete, unmitigated disaster over at your parents' house." "Give me the highlights, Clara. I only have an hour before my board meeting," I said, smiling softly. "Eleanor finally broke," Clara explained, her eyes wide. "She drained almost 50% of Robert's 401k, paying off Julian's remaining predatory debts, and trying to maintain his lifestyle so he wouldn't sink into a deeper depression after Chloe left him. But the penalty fees and taxes from the early retirement withdrawals absolutely destroyed them financially. Robert finally grew a spine, threatened to file for a brutal divorce, and legally froze their joint accounts. I raised my eyebrows. Dad actually stood up to her? He had to, or they would be living in a cardboard box under the overpass by next winter, Clara scoffed. Without access to the endless cash, Eleanor suffered a complete psychological breakdown. All her friends at the country club started asking why Julian was 30 years old and living in the basement. The social shame was too much for her narcissism to handle. Robert forced her into intense, weekly psychological therapy under the threat of leaving her. She hates it. The therapist is apparently forcing her to confront the fact that she ruined her youngest son by fiercely protecting him from reality. "And what is the reality of the golden child these days?" I asked, stirring a sugar cube into my coffee. Clara let out a sharp, genuine laugh. "Julian was given a harsh ultimatum by your father. Get a job, a real job, or get kicked out onto the street. Since his resume consisted of pouring coffee and a 2-year gap of playing video games, nobody in the corporate world would even look at him. He is currently working full-time at a massive Amazon fulfillment warehouse." I paused, letting that image truly sink into my mind. The guy who sneered at me for being a corporate drone. The guy who thought he was too inherently creative and brilliant for a regular paycheck was now wearing a high-visibility vest and steel-toed boots. He is doing brutal manual labor, Clara continued, relishing the details. He is sweating, lifting heavy boxes for 10 hours a shift, taking orders from a manager who is 5 years younger than him. And because Robert demanded he pay fair market rent to live at home to rebuild their savings, Julian realized it was cheaper to move out. He is currently living in a dingy, incredibly loud 3-bedroom apartment in a terrible part of town with 3 random roommates he found on the internet. He has to take the public city bus to the warehouse because his credit is so destroyed from the Porsche repossession that he cannot even get approved for a predatory loan on a used Honda. I looked out the cafe window. I didn't feel malicious joy, but I felt a deep, overwhelming sense of universal justice. Gravity had finally taken hold. Julian was no longer floating in the artificial, gravity-free bubble my money and my mother's delusions had created. He had crashed violently down to earth, and the impact had shattered his entire false identity. "He is miserable, Arthur," Clara said quietly. "But for the first time in his entire life, he is actually living in reality. You did that. By shutting the vault, you forced them to face the music." "I didn't do anything to him, Clara," I replied, finishing my coffee. "I just stopped standing between him and the natural consequences of his own actions. The universe handled the rest." A few weeks after my tea with Clara, an unexpected email landed in my inbox. It was from Eleanor. It was not demanding. It was not manipulative. It was surprisingly brief and carefully worded. "Arthur, my therapist suggested I reach out. I know I have done terrible damage. I am learning how blind I was. I would like to see you, just for 30 minutes, to apologize to your face. No expectations. Mom." I stared at the screen for a long time. The old Arthur, the traumatized, guilt-ridden son, would have ignored it entirely, terrified of a trap. But the new Arthur, the man who owned his life, felt completely insulated. I agreed to meet her, but on my strict terms. Not at her house. Not for a holiday. A neutral, public coffee shop near my corporate office during my lunch hour. When I walked into the shop, I almost didn't recognize her. Eleanor looked like she had aged 10 years in the 12 months since I had seen her. The arrogant, demanding posture was gone. She looked small, tired, and deeply humbled. I sat down across from her. I did not offer a hug. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice wavering. She looked at my expensive suit, my relaxed demeanor. "You look incredibly well, Arthur." "I am doing exceptionally well," I said plainly. "What did you want to say, Eleanor?" She flinched slightly at the use of her first name, but she accepted it. She took a deep, shaky breath, her eyes filling with tears. "I am sorry," she whispered, the words sounding foreign on her tongue. "I am so deeply sorry for using you. I was terrified that Julian would fail, that it would reflect poorly on me as a mother. So I used your success, your generosity, to constantly pave his road. And when you finally stopped paving it, I panicked and attacked you. I destroyed my relationship with my best son to protect my weakest one. And in doing so, I ruined him anyway. The therapist is making me look at all of it, and it is horrifying." I listened to her words. It was a real apology. It was not perfect. There was still a hint of making it about her own maternal image, but it was light years ahead of the driveway ultimatum. "I appreciate you saying that," I said, leaning forward slightly. "I genuinely do. But an apology does not automatically erase a decade of financial and emotional abuse. I forgive you, Eleanor, for my own peace of mind. I am letting the anger go. But I need you to understand something very clearly." She looked up at me, tears spilling over her cheeks. "The dynamic is permanently dead," I stated with absolute, unshakable finality. "I will never be your ATM again. I will never write a check to fix a family problem. I will not be attending the chaotic Sunday dinners. I am not stepping back into the role of the reliable workhorse. If we have a relationship moving forward, It will be distant, it will be boundaried, and it will be entirely on my terms. She nodded slowly, wiping her eyes with a napkin. I understand. I accept that. I just wanted you to know I know what I threw away. I stood up, paid for the coffees, and walked back to my office. I felt a massive, heavy knot dissolve in my chest. The confrontation was over. The boundary was set in stone, and it held. That evening, as I was sitting on the balcony of my new high-rise condo, overlooking the glittering city skyline, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Hey man, it's Julian. Clara gave me your number. I know you don't want to hear from me, but I just finished a 14-hour shift hauling boxes. My back is killing me, my roommates are awful, and my life is a complete joke right now. But I paid my own rent today, with my own money. Sucks, it is brutal, but it's mine. I get it now, Arthur. I finally get why you stopped writing the checks. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted to say you were right. I read the text message 3 times. There was no demand for money. There was no whining about how unfair the universe was. There was just a brutal, painful acknowledgement of reality. The golden child had finally been forced to touch the dirt. I typed out a very brief, measured response. Good luck with the rent, Julian. Keep showing up for your shifts. I hit send, and then I put my phone inside my pocket. I leaned against the glass railing of my balcony and took a deep breath of the cool night air. People often think that establishing firm boundaries is a cruel, selfish act. They think that cutting off toxic family members is a sign of a cold heart. But as I looked out over the city, totally secure in my finances, my career, and my mental health, I knew the absolute truth. Setting boundaries is not about punishing the people who hurt you. It is about actively, fiercely protecting the beautiful life you have worked so incredibly hard to build. I had spent 10 years setting myself on fire to keep my brother and my mother warm. And when I finally put the fire out, they called me the villain. But standing here now, whole, successful, and finally at peace, I realized that being the villain in their delusional narrative was the absolute best thing that ever happened to me. I had lost a toxic family, but I had finally, permanently, found myself. And that is a wealth no one can ever take away. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I know how incredibly difficult it is to finally say no to the people who share your blood. We are conditioned from birth to believe that family loyalty means endless, unconditional sacrifice, even when it destroys our own future. But my journey taught me one undeniable truth. Your value is not defined by what you can provide for others. You are allowed to protect your peace, you are allowed to protect your hard-earned money, and you are allowed to walk away from tables where respect is no longer being served. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to draw a brutal line in the sand to save yourself from being dragged down? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one of them, and your courage inspires me. And please, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next journey. Take care of yourselves and protect your peace.